when I wrote about your book for Denik N, I was immediately attacked by the website Ménej štátu SK less state.sk, that you are no economist and that it's too left-wing and you don't understand the great ideas of the three most important topics you're dealing with: deregulation, liberalization and privatization of the private properties, of the state properties into the private hands. So how did you react to this as being a historian, writing mostly on economic issues? Were the reactions in the German-speaking countries similar, that it's some sort of a controversial topic, that you are trying to analyze such a complicated, complex development?
First kind of, well, not the shock therapy, but the kind of first shock or disappointment was that actually the original values of the revolution kind of petered out and it got a different turn. And I always kept that in mind and was wondering, well, you know, why did it go a different way? I mean, revolution. Of course, there's. If you look at, I'm a historian first of all, but if you look at, and not an eyewitness, but if you look at revolutions, history of revolutions, it's quite normal that, you know, they start with a certain goal and then they get a different turn. But I always wanted to understand why. But well, then I didn't write the book for a long time because I thought this is still too close. You know, one needs more distance in terms of time, but also in terms of mind. And so I started to do this in 2008, 2009, when the 20th anniversary approached. Well, and then came a second shock. Of course, I don't know how your perceptions are in the audience here, but the second shock was in a way the split in '92. I mean, I guess probably now a majority of Slovaks views it rather positively, I would guess, and at least, I mean, in terms of generation, right, who is still born in Czechoslovakia as an adult, must be almost a minority nowadays, right? I mean, if you count back, let's say 92, 72, okay? A lot of time has passed. But anyway, that was also a shock because obviously, in my view, the main reason why the country split was the conflict about the reform strategy. Mečiar and Klaus, and of course a personal conflict. Each of them wanted to be the boss. Well, that happens in British politics as well recently, right? And then suddenly you get those strange results. So that was the personal take. And now your question about the economist's take. Oh well, I mean, I would consider myself, I also did some cultural history, but I started with social history and I did it again. So most of all I would say I'm a social historian. And social historian means that you don't look at these reforms primarily from above as the policy, but you look at the social results, right, bottom up.
On one hand, what are your choices in 1990, 1994 elections?
Yeah.
You can either vote for post-communist, which you sort of feel ashamed to do.
Yeah.
Then you have these broadly based movements which you don't even know what they stand for. And of course there are these guys who say, we know exactly what we are doing.
Yes.
We are following Thatcher, Reagan, all the rest of it. So there is one story there. The other story is that these guys are telling you the very same thing. They're basically perfect continuation of this late socialism story. And the late socialism story is sort of on Havel's dictum from the 70s is, you don't have to do anything. Keep your mouth shut. Listen to what, I mean, we are the politicians. You keep your mouth shut as an average citizen. We will deliver the consumer goods in a sizable portions. And unlike socialism, it's not going to be a usual Skoda car. It's going to be BMW. So you would be really foolish to mess with us.
I would agree, yes, there was a desire to have something new, and so there was some popular base of radical reforms. I would agree, in the 1990s, yes. This looked plausible. And I think it looked so plausible because the main promise was one of not just prosperity, or navrat do Europy, but it was, there was a promise of modernization. If you do those reforms now, the cuts now, then there will be a better, more prosperous future. And this is precisely the same argument like you had it in state socialism.
Political competition is moving from this traditional pattern between left and right, and you mentioned it that the campaigns are about migration, about European Union, about the so-called identity question. So it's not anymore about social and economic interests so much. And so now my question is, so how these two narratives fit into these new conditions of political competition? So do we face any reconfiguration of the dividing lines in the society? So it's not left and right anymore, definitely.
Just two comments. One is that there's this left-right distinction, but for example, when we did research with my wife on anti-corruption policies in government manifestos in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, we found that there was a difference between left and right on the sort of government versus market kind of things a little bit. So the more market-driven solutions were much more likely to be espoused by centre-right governments, and the sort of control instruments more likely by the left-wing governments. But there was also a third where actually the difference was much bigger, and that was the participatory and the public control approach, which the centre-right in both countries favored much more than the centre-left. So actually there was a bigger distinction than between markets versus hierarchies, between sort of participation, public control versus government control. And so the centre-right, I would argue that the centre-right in this region, or at least in former Czechoslovakia, is distinct from centre-left also on this, what we were talking about, the civil society and importance of the public participation, and both rhetorically and in practice. So that's one comment, and the other comment is I think, one thing we had in Slovakia, maybe not so much in the Czech Republic, is about this famous comment by Václav Klaus in 2004 about Slovak reforms, where he said these reforms could not happen in a more developed country because they would not be politically possible. And at the time the Slovaks didn't know how to take that. But then I had in 2012, 2013, I had a private conversation with one of Fico's ministers, and he told me, "I'm very disappointed in you because, we used to be the guys who are responsive and do what people like, and you are the guys who do what's necessary. And now even you guys are trying to say what people like. So who's gonna be the one who does what's necessary?"
Yeah, it will be a very simple question. Somehow also connected with the problem. There is no more interests policy, or it's not so important anymore, and the identity policy is going to decide our future. That question was not on the agenda originally, but we still, most of us are in a state of shock after, however expected it might be, the Brexit. And what do you think will be the role of the semi-peripheric states like ours, and what would be the impact?
I think there's more to it. It's not just about identity. It has to do with social changes, and at least that more and more people are, even if they're not poor. Of course they're not poor, but some. I think a part of the electorate, if you take Britain for example. A strong anti-European electorate was the unemployed, the disempowered, the poor. This was the main brunt. Of course, then there was part of the elites and well, let's not forget the media. Boulevard media, which are going down the drain, the tabloids, because in the internet world, what are they? So there was a last struggle, and they're constantly having the struggle with the most blatant campaigns and lies. That's how they try to survive 10 or 20 years more. But anyway, either those the lower parts of we can talk about transformation losers, but yes, your point was right. In a way, they are transformation losers. They are losers of economic reforms, or they are afraid of them. And there's a lack of perspective in this lower middle class. And I think this drives most people to those parties. And it's not just about identity. I think it's maybe here in this part of Europe might be more about national identity and against Brussels and Brussels as the Union, the European Union as the reincarnation of the Soviet Union. I mean, Klaus again. But and I understand, for countries which have won the national sovereignty 25 or 27 years ago. Okay, it's more important than maybe for other countries. But I think the main thing behind it is not, identity then. Is it really cultural, what we're having now, the problem? In parts it might be, but I think the main thing is something else. I would say.
I would agree and maybe build up on that. First of all, I don't, what I'm gonna say is probably not true in Poland or Hungary, but I don't know many people in Czechoslovakia who believe in sovereignty. I mean, not normatively, but that they actually exist. Even the nationalists don't believe that we were sovereign at any point in time. So, and I think on the Czechs is similar. That just independence doesn't mean sovereignty. So I would say that it's and that's one of the reasons why we for a long time didn't have and still have so many problems with the union, is that if you don't believe you have something to lose, then you don't worry so much about losing it. So I think that might be a little bit different here, but the motto of the Brexit campaign, I think, was brilliant, and I think it applies here as well. Which the motto, if you remember, was "Take back control." And I think if someone could organize a referendum about something in this country which could have a motto "Take back control," and I think that referendum would be very successful. We just don't have, we just don't know what it would be about.
But basically you could translate ľudia potrebujú istoty in a way.
Yeah, but in a way, yes, and that's why Fico won. But because he's not delivering it, then But yeah, in a way, yes. So I'm trying to say is that it's this feeling of control that and. As I try to say, Slovaks are maybe a little bit sensitive about, because we for a long time haven't felt like we have control of our destiny, but still many people are very frustrated, and they would, I think, respond positively to that. And if you look at the Brits and the Central Europeans, I think you see two very different things, but with very similar outcomes, which is that in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, also in Hungary, we accepted things which would be unacceptable in Germany or France. I mean, they talk a lot about globalizations, but if they had 95% of their banking system owned by multinational banks, and if they had 80% of their manufacturing sectors owned by fully multinationals, then the Germans and the French would be very, very upset about. Even the supposedly relaxed Brits would be very, very upset about such a complete foreign control of their economy. But at the same time, if Bratislava was suddenly to have 150,000 foreigners living here, which is the same proportion as in London, or even 200,000 foreigners, this city would probably erupt. I mean, we don't have a tradition of handling such a simulation, and I don't think we could learn very fast. And you could see it in the refugee crisis, how much even very small numbers could drive up the hysteria high. So in a way, the things we
look back to your pre-war history.
Yeah. So the things we cannot accept, at least politically, are the things the Brits could accept, and then vice versa. But in the end, they're also about control. But one is more in the economy, one is more about the migration. But I think it's similar thing, but just in different channels.
Is it a failure of neoliberal economy?
The transition path of Slovakia, comparatively speaking and historically speaking, I think cannot be termed a failure. You can criticize it on many things, but if you said it's a failure, then show me the success of a comparable country, to Slovakia. So I mean, so first of all, that's one point on the big part. But overall, I think if you look at, if you talk to people who are now abroad, and I think that's the real political challenge now, is how to change that. Then the reasons are less and less related to wages, and less related to the sort of direct economic factors, and more related to quality of life issues ranging from corruption, but also the quality of the public services and the overall public atmosphere. So I think, while some people, depending on who you dislike, I don't mean you personally, but whom you dislike as a citizen, you can blame that on communism, long-term history, Mečiar, neoliberalism, who you want. You can find a plausible tale for everyone to be responsible for this thing. But I personally think that, and that brings me where I started, that if you want to have a certain type of state and certain type of state capacity, you need to build that. We don't. Here I fully agree with the professor that there was this long time an assumption that because the communist state was sort of too big, that the way to get to normal state is just to cut it down. And now I think nearly everyone except for this Mene Statu SK knows that that was not the true story. That you need a little bit maybe to cut down, but you much more need to restructure, to build up things that didn't exist before and cut things that maybe existed before, or even just reform. And I think so. I would say if there is some fault of what you would call neoliberalism, I think it's that it participated in this, that it didn't think carefully enough at the time about this thing. Because I think there are now very few people, at least in this country, who would still think that the problem was just cutting down. And I think there is now a vast majority who realize that if you don't do the other part, then the cutting down basically doesn't bring you much.
I would agree that it is a very important issue, and it also, I think, is an issue where one can look at those reforms not from this, abstract position, where it's like a medical doctor who then gives out a therapy. I mean, what is a therapy? If you just think about the words, even more so the shock. And if migration, I think, forces us to think about reforms from a more popular daily life basis, and that's why I think it is important to think about it. But as a historian, we usually rather put up questions than we have ready-made recipes.
Okay.